Hello guys, welcome to Biology Made Easy. My name is Miss Natasha and I'm going to take you through today's topic. So today we are going to look at transport in plants. So basically we are going to look at how substances are transported in plants. So without wasting any time, let's jump right into it. So plants have roots, leaves, stems, flowers and fruits. And in this diagram, we can see an example of a plant. So it has got some flowers, some fruits, some leaves, and some roots. So flowering plants can be divided into two main groups, monocotyledonous plants and dicotyledonous plants. Basically, they are called monocots and dicots. So monocots have one cotyledon in their seeds. They have a branching root system, they have parallel leaf veins, and they have thin long leaves. For example, the maize plants. Dicots have two cotyledons in their seeds. They have a taproot system, they have a network of branching leaf veins, they have broad leaves, and an example of a dicot plant is the bean plant. So this diagram shows us what a monocot plant looks like and what a dicot plant looks like. So this is a monocot plant. The leaves are thin and long and the veins are parallel. And this is a dicot plant. The leaves are broad and they have a network of branching veins. So this is a monocot plant and this is a dicot plant. This diagram shows us the transverse section of a stem. So in the transverse section of a stem, we can see xylem vessels and phloem vessels. So the phloem vessels are the ones in blue, and the xylem vessels and the phloem vessels are separated by the cambium. So this is the cortex of the stem and this is the epidermis of the stem. So xylem vessels transport water from the roots to the rest of the plant. Phloem vessels transport sucrose and amino acids from where they are made to the other parts of the plant. The cortex can be used as a storage space and the cambium separates xylem vessels from phloem vessels. In this diagram, we can see the transverse section of a root. So the transverse section of a root looks different from the transverse section of a stem. The xylem vessel is star-shaped and the vascular bundle, which consists of the xylem vessels and the phloem vessels, is located in the center. We can also see the cambium, which separates the xylem vessels from the phloem vessels. We can also see the cortex, the endodermis, and the epidermis. So the xylem vessels transport water from the roots to the rest of the plant. The phloem vessels transport sucrose and amino acids from where they are made to the other parts of the plant. The cortex can be used as a storage space and the cambium separates xylem vessels from phloem vessels. In this diagram, we can see what a phloem tube looks like. It is usually accompanied by a companion cell. So this is what a phloem tube looks like. And in this diagram, we can see what a xylem vessel looks like. It is hollow, meaning that it is empty. So this is what a xylem vessel looks like. And this is what a phloem tube looks like. Moving on, let's now look at how the food that is made during photosynthesis is transported around the plant. The leaves make carbohydrates by photosynthesis and they also use some of those carbohydrates to make amino acids, proteins, oils, and other substances. So some of the organic food materials that are made by the plant are transported in phloem tubes. and these tubes carry the food from the leaves to whichever part of the plant the food is needed. So the transportation of food around the plant in phloem tubes is called translocation. And by definition, translocation is the movement of sucrose and amino acids in the phloem tubes from regions of production to the regions of storage. So regions of production are known as the source, and the regions of storage or utilization are known as the sink. So the sap inside the phloem tubes contains a lot of sugar, particularly sucrose, and part of the plant from which the sucrose and the amino acids are being made is called the source, and part of the plant from which they are being transported to or translocated to is called the sink. So the source is the area of production and the sink is the area of utilization or storage. The leaves are usually the sources just because photosynthesis takes place in the leaves. The roots, flowers, and fruits are usually the sinks. So roots may change some of that sucrose to starch for storage, and flowers use sucrose to make fructose. So fructose is used to make nectar. Moving on, let's now look at how water is absorbed from the soil and how it moves in the xylem vessels to the rest of the plant. Plants take in water from the soil through their root hairs. And the basic function of the root hairs is to absorb water and minerals from the soil. And after the water has been absorbed, it is carried by the xylem vessels to all parts of the plant. So water moves into the root hairs by osmosis, and then it also moves into the xylem vessels by osmosis. So the soil has got a high water potential than the root hairs, and by definition, osmosis is the movement of water molecules from a region of high water potential to a region of low water potential through a partially permeable membrane. So water moves from the soil, which has got a high water potential, into the root hairs where there is a low water potential. So when water moves into the root hairs by osmosis, it then moves into the xylem vessels. So it moves from cell to cell by osmosis until it reaches the xylem vessels. The vessels then transport it all the way up through the stem to the leaves due to the pressure differences between the top and the bottom of the xylem vessels. So once the water reaches the xylem vessels, it moves up the xylem vessels in the same way that liquid moves up a straw when you suck on it. So when you suck on a straw, you reduce the pressure at the top of the straw, and the liquid at the bottom of the straw has got a high pressure, so it moves up the straw from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure. So if you continue to suck on the straw, the liquid will continue to flow up the straw. The same way happens when water moves in the xylem vessels. The pressure at the top of the xylem vessels is lowered, while the pressure at the bottom of the xylem vessel stays the same. So water moves up the xylem vessels as the pressure at the top of the xylem vessel is lowered. So the pressure at the top of the xylem vessels is reduced by transpiration. And transpiration is the evaporation of water from plant surfaces. So as water is lost, the pressure at the top of the xylem vessels is reduced. And then water moves up the xylem vessels from an area of high pressure at the bottom of the xylem vessels to an area of low pressure at the top of the xylem vessels. This diagram shows us a root tip. So these are the root hairs, this is the epidermis, and this is the root cap. The root cap protects the tip of the root as the root grows into the soil. And this diagram illustrates what I was trying to explain. So water enters the root hairs by osmosis, and it moves from cell to cell by osmosis until it reaches the xylem vessel. And once the water reaches the xylem vessel, it moves up the xylem vessels in the same way that a liquid moves up a straw when you suck on it. So when you suck on a straw, you reduce the pressure at the top of the straw. So the liquid at the bottom of the straw has a high pressure, so the liquid flows up the straw into your mouth. The same thing happens with water when it moves up the xylem vessels. The pressure at the top of the vessels is lowered, whilst the pressure at the bottom of the xylem vessel stays the same. So water flows up the xylem vessels from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure. So the pressure at the top of the xylem vessels is reduced by transpiration. And transpiration is the evaporation of water from plant surfaces. So as long as water continues to evaporate from plant surfaces, the pressure at the top is reduced and water flows up the xylem vessels. So water enters the root hairs by osmosis, and it passes across the root from cell to cell by osmosis until it reaches the xylem vessels. And then water is drawn up the xylem vessels because transpiration is constantly removing water from the top of the xylem vessels. Transpiration is the loss of water vapor from plant surfaces by evaporation, followed by the loss of water vapor through the stomata. So basically, transpiration is the loss of water vapor from plant surfaces by evaporation. So most of the evaporation takes place from the leaves. There are small openings on leaf surfaces that are called stomata. They are usually numerous on the underside of the leaf, and usually each side of the leaf is covered by a thin film of moisture. So some of this moisture that covers the leaf evaporates, and water from the xylem vessels in the leaves travels to replace that thin film of moisture. So water is constantly being taken from the top of the xylem vessels to supply the cells in the leaves. This reduces the pressure at the top of the xylem vessels so that water flows up the xylem vessels. So all this is known as the transpiration stream. This diagram illustrates the transpiration stream. So water evaporates from the leaves, and then water moves from the xylem vessels into the leaves in order to replace the water that would have evaporated. Then more water is then absorbed from the soil by the root hairs. So water enters the root hairs by osmosis, and then it travels up the xylem vessels in order to replace the water that would have evaporated from the leaves. So some of the water is also used for photosynthesis. A number of factors affect the rate of transpiration. And we mentioned that transpiration is the loss of water vapor from plant surfaces. So temperature, humidity, wind speed, light intensity, water supply, and surface area affect the rate of transpiration. The first one we are going to look at in detail is temperature. On a hot day, water evaporates more quickly from the leaves of a plant. This means that as the temperature increases, the rate of transpiration increases. So in general, as the temperature increases, the rate of transpiration increases. Humidity means the moisture content of the air. The higher the humidity, the less water will evaporate from the leaves. So when humidity increases, the rate of transpiration decreases. So this means that when there is a high moisture content in the air, less water will evaporate from the leaves, and then transpiration will decrease. So as humidity increases, the rate of transpiration decreases. On a windy day, water evaporates more quickly than on a still day. So as the wind speed increases, the rate of transpiration increases. So in general, as the wind speed increases, the rate of transpiration increases. In bright light, a plant may open its stomata to let in carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. So as the stomata open, more water therefore evaporates from the leaves through the stomata. So increasing the light intensity increases the rate of transpiration. So in general, an increase in light intensity increases the rate of transpiration. If water is in short supply, the plant will close off its stomata. This happens in order to prevent excessive water loss, and the closure of the stomata will slow down the rate of transpiration. So transpiration decreases when water supply goes below a certain level. So in general, a decrease in water supply decreases the rate of transpiration. A large amount of water vapor evaporates from large or broad leaves, and a small amount of water vapor evaporates from small leaves. This is because the large or broad leaves have got a large surface area, and the larger the surface area, the greater the rate of transpiration. So an increase in the surface area increases the rate of transpiration. So as long as the leaves are large, the rate of transpiration will also increase. An instrument called a potometer is used to measure the rate of transpiration in plants. When plants lose more water than they can take up, they wilt, and in Shona we call it kushava. So the leaves have adapted in order to prevent excessive water loss. So some leaves are small, and this reduces the surface area of evaporation, and some of them are curled, and this also reduces the surface area of evaporation. Some leaves have thick cuticles and small hairs to prevent excessive water loss, and there are a few stomata on the upper surface of the leaf which is directly exposed to sunlight to prevent excessive evaporation of water. Transpiration is useful in plants. This is because it creates the transpiration stream, which helps to keep water moving up the xylem vessels. And evaporation of water from plant surfaces helps to cool the plant. So we have come to the end of our session. So thank you guys for staying tuned until the end.